The rogue star floated motionlessly in the vast emptiness of space, its hull battered and scarred. The distant stars twinkled peacefully, but the battle had left its mark. The crew sat in silence, the weight of what they had just survived hanging heavily in the air. They had destroyed the enemy warship, an incredible victory, but Heron couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. "Captain," Lieutenant Calla spoke up, her voice still strained. "I'm getting strange readings from the wreckage. Something's not right." Heron turned to her, his brow furrowing. "Explain." The warship's destruction didn't trigger a normal debris field. Instead of drifting apart like expected, the fragments seem to be forming something. Heron's heart skipped a beat. Forming what? Calla hesitated before answering. "A second wave. It's as if it's reorganizing. Like something inside the ship's core is trying to reassemble." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The warship had been destroyed. There shouldn't be any more danger. But Calla's words sent a chill through Heron. There was no way that ship could be coming back. Could it? "We need to investigate," Heron said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Prepare a shuttle. Get teams ready to analyze the wreckage. I want to know exactly what's going on." Ensign Torrin was already at the controls, his fingers flying over the console. "Aye, Captain. We're prepped for a shuttle launch. We'll send a small team to analyze the debris." "Good," Heron replied, keeping his voice calm. "Stay alert. If something's wrong, I don't want us to be caught off guard." The shuttle launched from the rogue star with a hiss, its engines firing as it headed toward the destroyed remains of the warship. The rest of the crew watched through the view screen, holding their collective breath. The wreckage seemed to shift, almost like it was moving of its own accord, the once scattered fragments now drawing closer, as if they were pulling together in a choreographed motion. "It's impossible," Calla murmured, staring at the view screen in disbelief. "This shouldn't be happening. There's no way the warship systems can be reactivating after such destruction." "I don't care how impossible it seems," Heron said firmly. "We're going to find out what's going on." Minutes passed in tense silence. The shuttle was nearing the heart of the wreckage, its crew scanning the debris for any signs of life, or something more ominous. Heron's eyes never left the screen, his gut telling him that something far worse than just a damaged warship was out there. Suddenly, the shuttle crew's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, you need to see this. The core of the warship, it's alive." "What do you mean, alive?" Heron asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and dread. "We've discovered a strange energy signature. It's not just a weapon system or power core. It's something biological. Something organic is integrating with the ship's systems." Heron's breath caught in his throat. The wreckage wasn't just reassembling, it was evolving. "Get out of there. Now," Heron ordered. "Abort the mission. Get back to the ship." The shuttle crew didn't need any further prompting. They turned their ship around, racing back toward the rogue star. But the strange energy signature had already started to affect the shuttle systems. Lights flickered, and the comms went static. "We're losing power, Captain," one of the shuttle crew members shouted through the crackling comms. "Something's pulling us in. We can't break free." "Shut down your engines," Heron barked. "Cut all power, or you'll be dragged in." It was too late. The shuttle systems were already overwhelmed, and Heron watched in horror as the shuttle was pulled into the core of the wreckage. "Captain," Calla cried, her voice full of panic. "They're gone. The shuttle's gone." The crew on the rogue star could only watch as the shuttle disappeared into the chaos. The wreckage, once a lifeless hulk, now seemed to pulse with energy, like it was feeding off the power of the ship and the shuttle, growing stronger with every passing second. "We need to leave. Now," Heron said urgently. "Full speed ahead. Plot a course out of the debris field." But as they turned the rogue star around, the view screen revealed something more terrifying than they could have imagined. New ships, dozens of them, small, sleek, and somehow alive, their forms shifting as if they were made from the same organic material they had just witnessed. "It's a trap," Kala whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "This isn't just a warship, it's some kind of hive." "Now!" Heron shouted. A blast of energy surged from the rogue star's weapons, and it struck the enemy ship with deadly precision. The warship's shields flared as the blast hit, and for a moment, it seemed as though the attack had done little. But then there was a crackle, and the shield system faltered. Heron could see the faint shimmer of a shield that was weakening. "Direct hit to their aft shields," Tan yelled. "Their energy levels are dropping. Keep the pressure on them," Heron ordered. "We need to disable their weapons before they retaliate." Kala looked at him, her face filled with a mix of fear and hope. "Are you sure we can do this? We're running low on firepower." Heron didn't answer immediately. He didn't have time to argue. "Focus on their weapons array," he said. "We need to silence them now." The rogue star pivoted, positioning itself for another shot at the enemy warship. But as they moved into position, something unexpected happened. The warship began to glow, a strange, pulsing light emerging from within. It was as if the enemy ship was charging some kind of energy weapon, preparing for a final strike. "Captain," Kala shouted, "it's charging something massive. All hands, brace for impact." Heron barked. "Prepare to divert all power to the shields." This is it. The energy pulse from the enemy ship built rapidly, and the crew could feel the ship vibrating with the raw power being concentrated. Heron's heart raced. If that weapon hit them directly, they would be torn apart in an instant. "Firing now," Tan shouted. The rogue star fired again, hitting the enemy ship's weapons array with everything they had. The explosion was blinding, and for a moment, the view screen was filled with static. The crew held their breath as the smoke and debris cleared. There was a brief silence. Then the comms officer, Lieutenant Rill, broke it with a shocked whisper. "Sir, their weapon systems, they're down." Heron couldn't believe it. Against all odds, they had done it. They had struck a critical blow. But the warship wasn't done. Its energy signature was still pulsing, and it wasn't retreating. "They'll be back," Heron muttered. "We've only bought ourselves a few minutes. Get us out of here. Full speed ahead." The rogue star lurched forward once again, its engines roaring as it sped through the asteroid field, trying to put distance between them and the warship. But as they moved, Heron knew one thing. They were far from safe. The warship would recover, and next time, it wouldn't be so easy. The rogue star darted through the asteroid field, its engines pushing the ship to its limits. The crew was exhausted but determined. They had dealt a blow to the warship, but Heron knew they weren't out of danger yet. The warship would adapt, and it would come for them again. There was no mercy in this battle, and every moment they bought was a gift they couldn't squander. "Captain," Lieutenant Kala called from her station, "I'm detecting movement. The enemy ship is reorienting. It's coming in fast." Heron's eyes narrowed. The enemy was fast, too fast. How long until it's in range? 30 seconds, Kala replied, her voice tight with urgency. "They're locking onto our position." "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Heron ordered. "Torin, get us out of here." Ensign Torin, the navigator, tapped into the controls, quickly plotting a new course. "Aye, Captain. I'm setting a new trajectory to the outer rim of the asteroid belt. We'll use the debris to block their line of sight again." The ship veered sharply, sending a wave of motion through the crew. The asteroid field was chaotic, filled with massive rocks, floating debris, and dangers lurking in the shadows. It was the perfect place to hide, but also the most dangerous. "Shields are still at 15%, Captain." Tan, the weapons officer, shouted from his station. "We can't take another hit like that." Heron clenched his jaw. Every second counted. The warship was closing in, its glowing presence looming ominously on the view screen. It was coming, fast and relentless, like a predator on the hunt. We can't outrun it forever, Heron muttered to himself. We need a plan. Captain, I have an idea. Ensign Torrens spoke up, his voice low but eager. The asteroid belt. We could use it to our advantage in a more aggressive way. The fleet drifted through the dark silence of space, its engines humming softly. Captain Heron stood on the bridge of the lead ship, Rogue Star, looking out into the abyss. It was supposed to be an ordinary patrol. His crew, skilled and calm, had done this many times before. Space was vast and empty, the perfect environment for their peaceful mission. Everything looks normal, Lieutenant Calla said, checking the ship's sensors. The routine of space travel had a way of soothing the crew, making them feel safe. But Heron knew the void was never as peaceful as it seemed. The silence was suddenly broken by a small alarm, barely a whisper. The sensors were blinking, showing something unexpected. A strange signal, faint but there. A strange energy signature, Calla reported, her voice tight with uncertainty. Heron frowned. Can you identify it? I've never seen anything like it, sir. It's not coming from any known ship or station. The captain's eyes narrowed. Space was full of strange things, but unknown energy signals always put him on edge. They could be from a distant planet, or worse, a threat. He leaned forward, his fingers tapping the armrest of his chair. Send a probe, he ordered. Calla quickly complied, but as she activated the probe, another alarm blared. This one was louder, more urgent. Warning. Incoming signal from the unknown source. Heron's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a random energy reading. Something was out there. Something. Active. Can we trace it? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Calla shook her head. It's too erratic, sir. It's almost as if it's moving or changing direction. The signal is unstable. Stay on it, Heron commanded. He turned to his crew, trying to keep the growing tension off his face. The crew shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried glances. It was not like them to be caught off guard like this. For all their training and technology, they had never encountered a threat that didn't have a clear pattern, a clear source. Can you get a visual? Heron asked. Not yet, sir, Calla replied. The probe is still too far out. But just as she spoke, the ship shuddered. It was subtle at first, a slight vibration that passed unnoticed by most of the crew. But Heron felt it. His instincts were sharp. Shields up, he barked, his calm slipping away. The crew scrambled to follow orders. Heron's eyes locked onto the view screen as the vibrations increased. The ship was being pulled by an unseen force, something powerful and sudden. It wasn't the typical pull of gravity from a planet or a moon. This was different. The ship lurched again, this time much harder. The lights flickered as the Rogue Star began to sway. Heron grabbed the edge of his chair. Report, he shouted. Shields are holding, but just barely, Calla answered, her voice strained. We're being pulled in by something. The source of the energy. Suddenly, the probe's signal went dead. Lost contact with the probe. Calla exclaimed. It's gone. Whatever it was, it took the probe out. Get me a full scan of the area, Heron ordered. Calla quickly ran a scan, her hands moving fast across the console. But every time they tried to focus on the area around them, the signal grew more erratic, more chaotic. The closer they got, the more the systems seemed to scramble. The ship's engines groaned under the pressure, struggling to stay stable. Heron's mind raced. Whatever was out there, it was close. Too close. And it wasn't a coincidence. The energy signature appeared again, stronger now. It wasn't just an anomaly. It was intentional. This isn't random, Heron muttered, his eyes scanning the sensors. Something, is targeting us. Calla looked up from her console, her face pale. Sir, the energy pattern is locking onto our position. It's like it knows we're here. Heron's heart skipped again. A ship. They were being targeted by a ship. Can we identify it? No, sir. The signature is too strong to trace. But we're locked in. Set all defense systems to maximum, Heron commanded. He stood up, staring at the view screen, his mind working quickly. The ship had gone from a simple mission to something much more dangerous. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no accident. Someone, or something, was out there, waiting, watching. The energy signature on the sensors shifted again, growing larger and more powerful. A dark shape emerged on the view screen. It wasn't a simple ship. It was a warship. And it was coming straight for them. Heron's hands clenched into fists. "Get ready," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We don't know what we're dealing with, but we'll face it head-on." The rogue star was locked onto its target. Engagement was imminent. "What do you mean?" Heron asked, his curiosity piqued. "We can use the asteroids as a kind of cover for a sudden attack. We'll wait until the warship is within range, then launch everything we've got in a surprise strike. The asteroids will hide our movements until the last second." Heron's eyes sharpened. "You want us to draw them in and then hit them with everything?" "Yes, Captain. It's our best chance," Torin replied, his fingers dancing over the console as he adjusted the ship's path. "If we time it right, we can make it impossible for them to counterattack before we strike." It was a risky plan, one that could either turn the tide in their favor or end in total disaster. But Heron knew that at this point, they didn't have the luxury of time or options. "Do it," Heron ordered. "Tan, make sure we've got every weapon ready to fire on my mark." "Aye, Captain," Tan responded. The rogue star continued to weave in and out of the massive asteroids, barely dodging the larger objects as they sped forward. The warship, now locked onto them, was relentlessly following, closing the gap. Heron could feel his heart racing. The crew was tense, every eye on their stations, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Warship is within range," Kala reported. "They're not slowing down." "Ready, Captain," Torin said, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Just say the word." The warship loomed large on the view screen now, its hull visible through the gaps in the asteroid field. It was getting too close, closer than they had planned. Heron's instincts screamed that they needed to act. "Now," Heron shouted, his voice filled with authority. Torin slammed his hand onto the controls, sending the rogue star shooting out of its hiding spot with a burst of speed. The weapon systems fired in quick succession, launching missiles and energy blasts at the warship before it could react. The asteroids around them exploded as the shots collided with the debris, causing a massive distraction. The first blast hit the warship's hull, followed by a second. Sparks and explosions erupted from the enemy vessel. But before Heron could breathe a sigh of relief, the warship's retaliatory strike came. It fired back with a blinding flash of energy. The rogue star rocked violently as the blast struck their port side, sending crew members sprawling. Warning alarms blared as the ship's shields flickered dangerously. Heron's stomach twisted as the ship groaned under the strain. They couldn't take much more of this. "Shields failing. We've lost power in the starboard thrusters," Kala reported, her voice tense. "We're drifting off course." "Hold steady," Heron shouted. "Torin, get us back on track. We need to finish this." Torin quickly recalculated the ship's trajectory, trying to regain control. "It's going to be a rough landing, Captain. I'm doing my best, but we're taking hits from every direction." The warship wasn't backing down. It was still coming, its weapons charged and ready. The enemy ship's massive energy weapon was glowing again, preparing for another devastating blast. If they didn't act quickly, the rogue star would be destroyed. "Tan," Heron said, turning to his weapons officer. "Is the main cannon charged?" "Almost there, Captain," Tan replied. "Just give me a few more seconds." "We don't have that long," Heron snapped. "We need to strike now." The warship fired again. The beam of energy lanced through the void, heading straight for the rogue star. It was too close. This time, it would hit. "Brace for impact," Heron shouted, throwing himself into his seat as the ship shuddered with the force of the blast. The ship was thrown off course, and alarms blared across the bridge. The crew held their breath, waiting for the worst. But then, with a deafening roar, the Rogue Star's main cannon fired, sending a concentrated blast of energy straight into the warship's central reactor. The beam struck with perfect precision, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then the explosion came. The warship erupted in a brilliant flash of light, its shields failing, and its entire body disintegrating into space. The shockwave hit the Rogue Star, sending it tumbling, but the Rogue Star held together, barely. Did we do it? Kala whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Heron exhaled, his hands gripping the edge of his console. For now, we've won. But as the crew caught their breath, a deep sense of unease settled over Heron. The warship might be gone, but was it the last threat they would face? The battle had been fierce, and he knew that their fight for survival was far from over. As if on cue, the warship fired once again. But this time, it missed. The shot went wide, hitting nothing but empty space. The Rogue Star had managed to break their lock, at least for now. That was too close, Kala said, her breath shaky. They're adapting faster than we thought. We need to get ahead of them, Heron said. Full speed ahead. We've bought ourselves a few moments, but we can't waste them. The Rogue Star sped toward the planet's dark side, where the shadows of asteroids and debris could help cover their escape. They needed to get as far as possible before the warship could recalibrate its targeting systems. The tension in the air was thick, the crew working in unison to push the ship beyond its limits. It felt like they were gambling with everything they had, but it was their only chance. Heron gripped the chair, his mind racing. The unknown warship had already shown it could survive anything they threw at it, but the Rogue Star wasn't going down without a fight. For now, they had managed to stay alive. But how long would it last? The tension aboard the Rogue Star was unbearable. Every crew member was on edge, eyes constantly flicking to their consoles, hoping for a miracle. The warship was still out there, and though they had managed to shake it off for a moment, it wouldn't be long before the enemy recalibrated and came after them again. Shields are at 20%, Captain. Lieutenant Kala shouted, her voice strained. We won't last much longer if we don't do something drastic. Heron's mind was racing. They were cornered, their options limited. The warship, though unable to catch them immediately, was closing in again, and with its superior technology, it was only a matter of time before it found them. Their enemies knew no mercy. Status on the weapons systems, Heron asked, his voice firm but anxious. We're still functional, but not at full capacity, Weapons Officer Tan replied. The damage from the previous attack compromised several circuits. We can fire, but the shots won't be as precise. Heron's eyes narrowed. They were getting closer to the planet's asteroid belt, a field of large floating rocks and debris. It was dangerous to navigate, but it might offer them a chance to hide, or at least slow down their pursuer. But it wasn't a permanent solution. We don't have time to hide, Heron said, making a decision. Prepare for a counterattack. We'll use the asteroid belt to our advantage. Tan blinked, taken aback. A counterattack, sir. But... I know it's risky, Tan, Heron interrupted. But if we don't strike now, we won't get another chance. He turned to Ensign Torin, the navigator. Torin, plot a course through the asteroid field. We'll need to use the debris to cover our movements. Torin nodded quickly, his hands moving fast over the console. Aye, Captain. I'm locking in the coordinates now. It'll be tight, but we can make it. Heron took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Every decision was critical now. They had to take the fight to the warship, force it to make a mistake. They couldn't afford to wait for it to figure out their next move. Do it, Heron ordered. The Rogue Star surged forward, its engines roaring as it shot through the asteroid field. Large rocks and debris flashed by the view screen, and the ship barely managed to avoid collision after collision. The crew was pushed into their seats as the ship maneuvered through the chaos, but Heron's eyes remained focused on the distant warship. "It's still tracking us," Kala said, her voice low, filled with frustration. "It's like it can predict our movements." "Not for long," Heron muttered. 10. Target their aft shield systems. If we can breach it, we'll have a window to disable their weapons." 10 nodded, his fingers flying over the weapons controls. "Locked on, Captain. I'll fire on your mark." The rogue star weaved between asteroids, moving erratically to throw off the warship's targeting systems. The enemy vessel tried to keep up, firing blast after blast, but the asteroids provided enough cover to avoid direct hits. For a moment, it seemed like the warship might lose track of them. Then Heron saw it, the perfect shot. The warship's rear shields flickered momentarily, a slight vulnerability. The warship's power was undeniable. Every strike it launched hit with a force that made the rogue star shudder. The crew worked quickly to keep the ship intact, but they could feel the weight of the unknown enemy bearing down on them. They had tried to escape, tried to fight back, but nothing seemed to slow the warship down. It was like a shadow chasing them through the stars, relentless and unwavering. "Captain," Lieutenant Kala said, her voice shaking with strain, "we can't keep this up much longer. Our shields are weakening. We're being pushed to the edge." Heron gripped the armrest of his chair, his mind racing. They were outclassed in every way. The warship was faster, stronger, and its weapons were powerful enough to tear their ship apart with each shot. They had tried to maneuver, tried to fight back, but every move was countered with chilling precision. "We need to do something drastic," Heron said, his voice firm despite the rising panic in the back of his mind. "If we can't outrun it, then we'll need to outsmart it." "How do you suggest we do that, sir?" Kala asked, clearly skeptical but desperate for a solution. Heron looked at the view screen, his eyes narrowing as the warship loomed closer. It was still coming, its dark silhouette growing larger with every passing second. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. They were running out of time. "Prepare to engage the warp drive," he ordered. "We're going to use the gravity wells of the nearby planet to our advantage. We'll drop out of normal space, cause a gravitational disruption, and hopefully throw off their targeting." "That's a dangerous maneuver, Captain," Kala said, her voice hesitant. "We risk damaging the ship, maybe even destroying it." Heron turned to face her. "If we don't do something, we'll be destroyed anyway. I'm taking the risk." Kala hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She trusted him, but the fear was evident in her eyes. "We'll need to align the ship perfectly with the gravity well," the navigator, Ensign Torin, said, his voice tense. "One miscalculation, and we'll be caught in the planet's gravity and pulled in." "Just make sure we're ready," Heron replied. "We're going to give everything we've got." As the crew began to prepare the ship for the risky maneuver, the warship fired again. The blast hit the rogue star's starboard side, causing the entire ship to jerk violently. Sparks flew from the console next to Kala, and she cursed under her breath, working quickly to stabilize the systems. "Shields at 45%, Captain," Kala shouted. "If they hit us again, we're done for." Heron's heart pounded in his chest. There was no time to waste. He could feel the cold sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. If they didn't make this work, the warship would destroy them in seconds. "Ready for the warp drive, Captain," Ensign Torin called out. "On your mark. Now," Heron shouted. With a deafening roar, the rogue star's engines flared, the ship surging forward as it engaged the warp drive. The energy buildup was immense, and for a moment, everything felt as if it were in slow motion. Heron held his breath, his eyes glued to the view screen. They were nearing the gravity well of the nearby planet, the massive pull of its gravity threatening to tear them apart. The ship groaned under the pressure, but the crew held firm, following the captain's lead. "Calculations are locked," Torin called out. We're almost there. Get ready for the gravitational shift. Just as they crossed the threshold, the ship was jolted. The warp drive surged, the entire ship rocking violently as the gravity well of the planet latched onto the rogue star, pulling them sharply off course. The warship behind them wasn't prepared for such a sudden shift in velocity. They had anticipated a straight path, but the rogue star was now moving erratically, spiraling away from its original course. "Did we lose them?" Kala asked, her voice a mix of hope and disbelief. Heron's eyes were fixed on the view screen. He could see the warship, still following them, but struggling to keep up with the sudden change in speed and trajectory. It wasn't used to this kind of movement. It was like a predator, and they had just thrown sand in its eyes. "Not yet," Heron said, his voice calm despite the storm in his chest. "But we're not out of the woods yet. They'll adapt." The bridge was tense, filled with the quiet hum of machines and the steady sound of breathing. Captain Heron stood before the view screen, his jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of every second passing as the unknown warship drew closer. The sensors beeped erratically, and every crew member's eyes were fixed on their consoles, watching for any sign of what would come next. "Shields are holding at 85%, sir," Lieutenant Kala reported, her fingers moving swiftly across her console. "But there's no sign of what's causing the disruption." Heron nodded, though his mind raced. The unknown warship had already shown its power by locking onto them. It wasn't just tracking them, it was waiting. "Any comms from them?" Heron asked, his voice tight with frustration. Kala shook her head. "Nothing. The signal's too scrambled. We can't get a clear channel." For a moment, there was only the sound of the crew's movements, the occasional clicking of keyboards. Heron looked at the view screen, his gaze scanning the black emptiness beyond their ship. Where was it? He felt his pulse quicken as the energy signature flared again, more intense now. The ship they were tracking had to be close. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. "Get me a visual," Heron ordered. Kala immediately tried to adjust the sensors. A few seconds passed, the tension thickening with every moment. Then suddenly, the unknown warship appeared on the view screen. At first, it was a shadow, barely visible against the darkness of space. But as their ship adjusted its sensors, the shape became clearer. The warship was massive, darker than anything Heron had ever seen. It wasn't like any other vessel in the galaxy. There were no recognizable markings, no familiar structures, just a hulking, shadowy shape moving silently through space. The hull was jagged, built for destruction. It looked ancient, forged by time and battle. The crew watched in stunned silence. The unknown warship was now only a few thousand miles away, and it wasn't slowing down. "Can we outrun it?" Kala asked, her voice betraying a hint of fear. Heron didn't answer immediately. The warship's size was imposing, but it wasn't just that. It was the presence it carried, like it was relentless. "We'll try," Heron said after a moment. "Engage full throttle. Take us out of its path." The rogue star shot forward, its engines flaring as it accelerated. But the moment they began to move, the unknown warship followed, almost as if it knew their every move. "How is it keeping up with us?" Kala asked, her voice trembling. "It shouldn't be possible," Heron replied, his mind racing. "That ship, it's faster than it looks." For a brief moment, the rogue star pulled ahead. The crew sighed in relief, thinking they might have a chance to escape. But then, the sensors picked up something even worse. The warship opened fire. Boom! A powerful blast slammed into the rogue star's aft. The ship shook violently, the crew struggling to stay upright as the impact rattled the hull. "Damage report," Heron barked, gripping the armrest. "Shields holding at 70%, but they won't last much longer." Kala shouted. "That blast was far stronger than anything we've encountered." "Activate evasive maneuvers," Heron commanded. "Get us out of their targeting range." The crew scrambled to carry out the orders, but the warship wasn't giving them a chance. It continued to track them, its weapons locking onto their ship with precision. "We're trapped," Kala said, her voice full of dread. "There's no place to hide. No way to outrun it." Heron clenched his fists. They were running out of time. The warship had the speed, the firepower, and the precision to wipe them out if they didn't find a way to fight back. "Get me a weapons status," Heron demanded. "We have full weapons systems, Captain," the weapons officer reported. "But they're not enough. We're too outmatched." Heron's mind raced. They had no choice. They had to fight back. They couldn't escape, and surrender wasn't an option. This warship had targeted them for a reason, and it wasn't going to stop until they were destroyed. "Prepare to engage them," Heron said, his voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside him. "We may be outmatched, but we won't go down without a fight." "Yes, Captain," Kala responded, her hands flying over the console to arm the weapons. "Prepare all weapons. This is it, crew. We're not running anymore." As Heron spoke, the warship fired again, another energy blast racing toward them. But this time, the Rogue Star was ready. They fired back, shields crackling, as the weapons struck the enemy ship. But the shadow ship didn't flinch. It didn't stop. It was unstoppable. Heron's mind raced. The warship hadn't been destroyed. It had been a seed, planted in the hopes of creating a new, unstoppable force. And now, that force was growing. "Captain," Tan shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "There's a massive energy spike coming from the wreckage. It's not just ships, it's a fleet." The fleet of bioengineered ships emerged from the wreckage, their forms twisting and shifting, resembling both machines and creatures. They were fast, agile, and far more dangerous than the warship they had destroyed. "This is just the beginning," Heron murmured, realizing the true scope of the threat they were facing. "They were just the scouts. We've awakened something much worse." Kala looked at him, fear in her eyes. "What do we do now?" Heron's jaw tightened as he looked out at the advancing fleet, the horrific truth settling in. The Rogue Star had just opened a door to a nightmare, one they might not be able to close. "Prepare for battle," he said, his voice steady but filled with dread. "We're not running anymore. It's time to fight for our survival." The Rogue Star drifted in the cold emptiness of space, facing an overwhelming force. The fleet of bioengineered ships, agile, deadly, and seemingly alive, moved toward them with terrifying precision. Each one seemed to pulse with energy, like a living organism, and Heron knew that this was the fight they had been preparing for all along. But nothing had prepared them for the scale of the enemy they now faced. "Captain," Lieutenant Kala said quietly, her eyes fixed on the view screen. "They're closing in fast. We don't have much time." "We'll hold them off as long as we can," Heron replied, his voice grim but determined. He stood tall in his chair, hands clenched, ready for whatever came next. "Prepare all weapons. Let's show them they picked the wrong ship to mess with." Tan, the weapons officer, was already working quickly, lining up the Rogue Star's weapons. "Weapons charged, main cannon at full power. Shield systems are operational, but they won't hold for long against this many ships." "Understood," Heron said, though he knew there was little hope of surviving such a vast and relentless onslaught. The enemy fleet was growing. More ships were emerging from the wreckage, their numbers multiplying like some kind of dark swarm. "We're outnumbered," Torin, the navigator, said. "There's no way we can fight them all. We need a strategy." Heron's mind raced, searching for a way out. They couldn't outrun them, and fighting back head-on was suicidal. Their only hope was to buy time, to make the enemy waste their resources and leave a gap for something they couldn't predict. "We'll make them think we're retreating," Heron decided. "Kala, prep the decoy drones. We'll use them to distract the fleet, give us a window to launch the main cannon, and cause as much damage as possible. Torin, plot a course through the asteroid field. I'll use the environment against them." The crew was in motion, working as one. Heron could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It was a plan born from desperation, but it was all they had. They would need every ounce of luck and skill to survive this. The decoy drones were launched, whizzing into the vastness of space, their energy signatures designed to mimic the rogue star's movements. As the drones spread out, the enemy fleet hesitated, their ships drawn to the false signals, some veering off to pursue the distraction. It wasn't enough to turn the tide, but it bought them precious moments. "Course plotted, Captain," Torin called out, entering the asteroid field in 10 seconds. "Now," Heron ordered. The rogue star sped into the asteroid field, its engines screaming against the pull of gravity. The ship twisted and turned, narrowly avoiding massive chunks of rock as it flew through the maze of debris. The enemy fleet followed, but it wasn't built for the tight maneuvers that the rogue star was capable of. For a moment, Heron allowed himself a brief flicker of hope as the enemy ships began to lose formation. "Shields holding, Captain," Kala reported. "We've lost a few engines on the left side, but we can keep going." "Keep them engaged," Heron said, his mind focused on the plan. He knew the asteroid field was their best chance to slow down the enemy, but they couldn't stay there forever. They needed to strike, and they needed to do it soon. The rogue star emerged from the field, taking advantage of the brief confusion it had caused. The enemy fleet had split into 2 groups, but they quickly regrouped and turned their attention back to the rogue star. "We don't have enough firepower to stop them all," Tan said urgently, "but we can't let them get close enough to board us." "Then we make our last stand count," Heron said. "Fire the main cannon on my mark. I want everything we've got." The crew readied themselves. Heron could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he gave the order. "Mark." The rogue star's main cannon fired with a roar, sending a devastating energy pulse toward the enemy fleet. The blast hit one of the larger bioships head-on, causing an explosion that shook the very fabric of space around them. The ship disintegrated in a fiery burst, its remains scattered across the void. But the enemy didn't falter. They kept coming, relentless, closing in on the rogue star. "We're not going to win this fight," Kala said quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. "They're too strong. Too many." "We're not here to win," Heron said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We're here to make them pay, to show them we won't go down without a fight." The crew braced themselves for the worst as the enemy fleet surrounded them, their ships firing on all sides. The rogue star's shields flickered, barely holding. They had given everything they had, but Heron knew that their time was running out. Then, just as all hope seemed lost, something unexpected happened. A pulse of energy erupted from the edge of the battlefield. A new force. It wasn't from the rogue star, and it wasn't from the enemy fleet. It came from an unknown source, a new player in the war. The fleet of bioengineered ships halted, their movements disrupted by the sudden energy burst. Heron watched in confusion as the ships began to scatter, as if something was driving them away. "Captain," Torin shouted, "we're receiving a transmission." "It's a human signal." Heron's eyes widened. It wasn't possible. Another human ship. The transmission crackled through the comms, the voice on the other end clear and authoritative. "This is the Dawnbringer, a deep space fleet. You're not alone out here. We've come to help." Heron's heart surged with a mix of relief and disbelief. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. "We'll hold them off," Heron said, his voice filled with newfound hope. "Let's show them what humanity can do." With the Dawnbringer joining the battle, the fight for survival had taken a new turn. The bioengineered fleet wasn't invincible, and humanity wasn't done fighting. Not yet.